Hey guys, we are in Genesis 32 this week. For all you math nerds out there, that means we are 64% of the way done with the book of Genesis. Really, even though it's already September almost, which is crazy to think about. College football is back this weekend, which is awesome and crazy to think about. And we're almost 2/3 done with this year, which is crazy to think about. And so it's been such a fun year for me in the book of Genesis. I hope you've enjoyed it, but also I do this for me and my time with the Lord, and I hope it's useful and beneficial to you as well. And so we continue in the story of Jacob, and the last time we saw Jacob and Esau together, right? Jacob was a deceiver. Esau was angry at him. There was a lot of brotherly dynamics, conflict dynamics that existed between Jacob and Esau, and so finally we see this story in Genesis 32 where it says, it's titled that Jacob is preparing to meet Esau, and so Jacob is on his way, and he's walking, he's traveling, and God's angels meet with him because God's angels are with him. God's angels are protecting him, just like they are still with us today. God is available to us. His angels are with us. That exists for us today. It existed for Jacob back then, and Jacob was going because God told him to go. And, one of the things we have to realize about the commands of God is that the commands of God don't always lead to easy things. The commands to God can very easily lead to hard things. And it doesn't necessarily lead to us living a life of ease. That's not always what God does, but God is available no matter what to walk with us through any of these things, right? And so Jacob ends up sending some messengers to Esau, and he told them that he was going to give them some ox, some donkeys, some male and female, and all of that kind of stuff, because he wants to show Esau, I think, that he is prosperous, that he has been blessed by God, that he is generous, and he is also wealthy, and he wants to use that because he wants forgiveness from his brother. He wants to compensate for the wrongs that he has done. And so his plan is to send all of these animals and these people ahead of him to try to soften up Esau along the way, to try to give him some gifts to earn his favor. But it does say here that after the messengers went to meet with they go to Esau and tell Jacob that Esau's coming to meet him, and he has 400 men with him. Jacob's thinking, well, that's the number for a militia. And so Jacob's thinking he's bringing a militia here with him, and the only reason he would bring a militia here with him is if he's trying to fight me, if he's trying to get in a battle with me. Obviously, this is what he's trying to do. And so it says that Jacob in verse 7 was greatly afraid and distressed, and so he starts doing things. He divides people into two camps, and flocks and herds, and people and all of those kind of stuff, and if he attacks one camp, then the other camp can escape. And he's making all of these plans in preparation because of the fear that he has, because he's still estranged from his brother, the fear that he has that is a consequence of what he did to his brother. He has this he is distressed, he has this anxiety because of his brother. And one of the things we've seen about Jacob is this idea of self-sufficiency has run his life. He has always tried to do things himself. He has always made things happen himself. He has always tried to come up with his own plans, with his own ways. He has always tried to do things himself. And finally, in this moment, he realizes that Esau's coming. I have fear. I'm scared. I don't know what's going to happen. And so finally, what does he do? He doesn't just plan. He doesn't just make preparations in his own strength. No. Finally, he prays and he goes to God. God is with him. God wants to talk with him. God wants to be with him. God wants to hear from him. And finally, right, we've talked about it when his wife was barren. He just got mad. He didn't pray. He tried to plan and do all of this. And so finally, we do see him making plans, and that's important. We all have to make plans, but also we can't just make plans in our own strength without God. We have to pray and we have to plan. So finally, we see Jacob doing that. Here's what he says in verse 9. God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, the Lord who said to me, go back to your land and to your family, and I will cause you to prosper. So he's saying, God, I'm doing this because you told me to. right? I'm going to run into my brother Esau because I'm traveling to this place where you told me to go, God. This is I'm doing your will. I'm being obedient to you. So you need to take care of me, right? And then he says this, and I love the way that he puts this. I am unworthy of all the kindness and faithfulness you've shown your servant. Jacob knows the things that he's done. Jacob knows the deceit that's existed. Jacob knows all of that, and he realizes that God, even in the midst of all of those things, God has been faithful and kind to him because that's who God is. He is faithful and he is kind no matter what. He says, indeed, I crossed over the Jordan with my staff, and now I've become two camps. God, you've prospered me. All right, please rescue me. He wants deliverance. He wants rescue from his brother Esau, for I'm afraid of him. He's honest to God with his emotions. I'm afraid of him. Otherwise, he might come attack me, the mothers and their children. He's honest with God about his feelings and his thoughts. And then he says, you've said, God, that I will cause you to prosper. In other words, God, you told me I was going to prosper. And you told me you were going to make my offspring like the sand of the sea, too numerous to be counted. And so if you're going to do this, that means you got to deliver me from my brother Esau. So Jacob, points back to the promises of God and takes God up on his promise, and finally prays. And not only is he praying, and he's also planning. And then before he gets to Esau, and before he gets to the land that he is supposed to go to, he has a moment where he is left alone. And this time he doesn't meet multiple angels. He meets perhaps an angel, perhaps the angel of the Lord. Perhaps this is a theophany. Perhaps this is God himself. We don't know exactly, but Jacob meets this man who wrestled with him. And it says that Jacob would not let him go until the man blessed him. And he ends up breaking Jacob's hip. And I often ask myself, why did he break Jacob's hip? Why did he leave Jacob walking with a limp? I think it's because Jacob was so self-sufficient, had already done everything himself physically. And God, and he had to have a reminder of his weakness, that God was strong even when he was weak. He had to have a reminder that he needed to depend and rely on God fully and stop depending and relying on himself. Right? This man, before he could meet Esau, before he could become the covenantal heir in the promised land of God, he had to be changed. He had to be humbled. He had to rely and depend on God. And the way that God makes that happen here is by this wrestling match and by pulling his hip out of socket. Because God wanted him to be the person he needed to be before that. And sometimes God allows things to happen in our lives so that we can become the people that God needs us to be for his plans to prosper, the things that he wants to use us for us to be able to, for him to be able to use us to accomplish the plans that he has for us. And so that's what's happening here. Jacob is not going to be self-sufficient anymore. He's going to rely and depend on God, right? He's going to be humbled through all of this. But not only that, he says, I'm not letting go until he gets a blessing. And even though I don't know if it's what he was asking for, he does receive a blessing. And his name gets changed from Jacob to Israel. And this is so much bigger than a name change, because if you remember, the name Jacob means deceiver. The name Israel means prevailer. I prevailed, I wrestled and prevailed. This is a character change. This is the change of a person, not just a change of name. And so he gets his blessing in the form of a name change, which is much more than a name change, but indicates for us a character change that had to happen in Jacob before he could get what God desired for him to have. So I would just ask you, is there anything in you that needs to change? God wants to use you for something, to do something in you, to do something through you, to put you somewhere. And maybe there's something in you that you need to allow God to change in order for you to become that person. Are you trying to be too self-sufficient and not rely and depend on the Lord? Are you trying to do all of these plans in your own strength, but not spend time with God in prayer first before you plan? We learn all of those lessons from this man, Jacob, in Genesis 32, who is now a completely changed man, who is now prepared to meet his brother, and who is now prepared to be the covenantal heir in the promised land that God has called this family to. I love you guys. We'll see you next week for Genesis 33.